Once we broke through 30 to 32, that's where that 48 to 50,000 target came in. And what we really know is that that 30 to 32 level is right here on the charts. And we could see how it was the low of the mid portion of the bull market here. And when we came up to it under here, it was resistance, it rejected it, resistance, rejected, finally broke out. So in the near term, if it pulls back to 30 to 32, I'm a buyer at that level. If we saw a 50% drop in the stock market, I do think you'd see Bitcoin retesting that 15,000 level.
Examining the chart, Gareth Soloway, a technician who relies on data sets for future predictions, highlights the significance of significant events correlating with Bitcoin's market highs. Bitcoin is currently undergoing a sell-off, marking the first time since December 2023 that the flagship cryptocurrency has dropped below the $40,000 support zone. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq have finished higher for the past 6 trading days. Despite Thursday's muted gains, the technology-heavy Nasdaq has outperformed this week, tracking to finish up 1.3%. The benchmark S&P 500 has closed at a record high for 5 sessions in a row, the longest streak since November 2021. Soloway outlines a bearish perspective for Bitcoin, citing the possibility of market peaks in the S&P and a risk-off event impacting the broader equity markets. Deutsche Bank surveyed 2,000 consumers in the US, UK, and Europe following the approval of spot Bitcoin ETFs, the bank said in a report on Tuesday. Over one-third of respondents said that Bitcoin prices will drop below $20,000 by year-end, and more people expect the cryptocurrency to disappear rather than stay. The survey showed that 39% of participants believe that Bitcoin will continue to exist in the coming years, while 42% anticipate its disappearance. Soloway suggests that when Bitcoin dropped below the 30 to 32 level, it opened the path for a target between $40,000 and $50,000. Additionally, he is contemplating the possibility of Bitcoin reaching $100,000 in the future. Let's delve into the few clips from the interview. But before we begin, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell icon to stay updated with the latest content.
You have to start looking at the all-time highs at 69,000. And I would dare say that you probably are even looking at 100,000. Now, I still don't think that's the likely scenario here in the short term, but I do think that if everything continues as is with no recession, no risk off, then yeah, you're going to head back there and it'll just be a matter of time. Take a look at the chart here. And I think this is really telling and makes people understand what really went on. And so if we just look at the history, and I'm a technician, meaning I look at data sets to kind of predict the future. And that's really how I come to these conclusions. So if we go back to the 2017 Bitcoin bull market high, that was when the futures were approved, right? They basically debuted. So there was a lot of hype that took us up into that news. And then what happened? That was the high of the cycle. If we go to the first high in 2021, that was the IPO of Coinbase that debuted, and that marked that high. We had a correction to 30,000. We then go to the second high later in 2021, and that was the ETF for the futures, Bitcoin, right? And that marked that high as well. And so if you just look at that kind of consistency, that these big news stories that create so much hype create the top on Bitcoin, it makes sense why that would be the key level there, or why it would sell off on the news. Now, you can talk about GBTC, obviously selling Bitcoin. There was a lot of smart money that bought ahead of this news. GBTC was trading at a big discount, so it was kind of an extra bonus to them as well. And they're basically just at the point of taking profits. They know the run-up is now in play. They know that the general consensus of retail investors will be to take a little bit off the table. And that just creates this back testing, this move back to the downside. Now, just in terms of the 48 to 50,000 level, what's fascinating here is if we do a Fibonacci retrace, right? So we take the high of 69,000, the low to the absolute low of this bear market here, which was around 15,000 and change. Notice that the 618 Fibonacci trend line here, that's exactly the high there. And lastly, I'm just showing you how I kind of arrived at that 48 to 50,000 level. If we take the 2019 high, connect it through the lows of the bull market right here, we actually get that same level. And so when I get confluence of levels, that's really where I start to say, okay, this is going to be a major level of resistance. And sure enough, it was. This is the one bearish case that I have for Bitcoin, is that what happens if we get a market top in the S&P? What happens if we get a de-risking event in the overall markets, in the equity markets? And that then could also stall money from flowing into these new ETFs if people start to get scared. So right now, we know new all-time highs almost daily on the S&P and the NASDAQ 100, and that's great. But why is Bitcoin stalling out here? Okay, it's the GBTC selling of Bitcoin. That gives us that reasoning. But what, again, if we start to see the market sell off? And the one thing I'd like to point out to viewers here, which I think is really important, is that if you look at the past cycles on Bitcoin, so Bitcoin's topped out in December of 2017, the S&P topped out 6 weeks later in early 2018. If you go to 2021, the $69,000 high, the high was put in November. It was right at the end of December, 6 weeks later, that the S&P topped out. So I'm a little bit on alert here to say, okay, let's watch now 3 weeks. We're basically 3 weeks into since the spot ETF was approved. What happens over the next 3+ weeks? Do we see a stock market top, and do we see a correction there? And that would be another reason why you could argue that Bitcoin still has some downside to go.
Ethereum price has managed to keep losses below the 5% threshold this week, while Bitcoin and the global crypto market cap shrunk by up to 7%, respectively, before making a mild rebound. Ethereum price held the $2,200 support as the crypto market downturn intensified this week. Soloway highlights upside resistance at $2,500 to $2,700 for Ethereum and a potential move to $3,000 if certain levels are maintained. Additionally, Soloway discusses Solana and expresses a slightly bearish sentiment. Over the past 7 days, Solana's value decreased by around 12%. Looking at a broader time frame, Solana experienced an approximately 22% drop over the past month. Meanwhile, Solana has experienced a simultaneous decline of around 35% in trading volume. Now, let's redirect our attention to a video.
Long-term outlook is insanely rosy, and I want to be clear on that. A lot of people look at me as a bear. I'm a trader, right? So when I think it's going down, I'm going to short it. When I think it's going up, I'm going to go long. Those are my short-term trades. Longer term, I remain since the very beginning that this is probably the digital gold of the future, and we're seeing the adoption kind of going in that direction with the ETF approval. So again, for me, it's just, all right, well, if it wants to go down, sure, let it go down. I'll either short it and make money, or I'll wait to buy it at this level right down here, and then we'll look for that big bounce and potentially that next bigger move up. So yeah, definitely overall longer term, very rosy. It's just, to me, do I know if in 6 months or a year it's going to be at new all-time highs? I honestly don't know. Those longer term predictions are so hard. Ethereum obviously initially rallied to the upside on that spot ETF approval. The concept there was that we now have an Ethereum ETF that could be approved later this year. Now, we did see Ethereum pull back. I'm going to flip to a bigger time frame. So again, we saw this initial move up here, and then we've seen Ethereum come back in. Now, Ethereum is trading at a technical support level around 2140. This is really important for it to hold. If it breaks this, you could be headed towards 1700. But right now, it's holding that technical level. Upside resistance is 2700. And again, if we break through that, you'd likely see 3000. Now, again, in terms of my bias here, I'm going to let the levels do the talking. If we break below this trend line right here, then I start looking for that bigger move down. As long as we hold this, we could be headed back within a couple months, maybe to those upside targets of 2700, even 3000. And again, that would be on, I assume, the narrative that eventually the SEC will approve that Ethereum ETF. Now, a couple other charts out there. Ethereum, Solana, right? So let's take a look at Solana. Now, if we remove all these trend lines, let's just keep it as simple as possible and put one trend line in. Look at this break point that we just saw. So you can see how this trend line, price followed it over and over again and is even hit here, but look, it broke it here. So what this tells me is that Ethereum, or Solana, excuse me, is now vulnerable as long as it stays below this yellow trend line. And again, right now, you'd think that this probably has further downside after such a monumental run to the upside. So as long as it stays below this trend line, which currently sits around 97, 98, I would be slightly bearish on Solana until it retraces probably at least until about the $65 level.
The overall cryptocurrency market needs help to gain momentum, especially Bitcoin, following the exchange-traded fund approval. However, on January 26, 2024, Matrixport, an all-in-one crypto financial services platform, predicted that Bitcoin would fall to its next support level, $36,739. What is your stance? Your input is valuable. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this content helpful, Give it a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to stay updated. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us.